What happens when a man spends his life measuring water, but never tasting faith? When logic rules his heart, yet death rips him into a truth he cannot deny.
My name is Eli Shahar, and for most of my 58 years, I lived as if God were a myth told by the desperate. I was a scientist, a limnologist, specializing in the study of freshwater lakes. For over 3 decades, my office was the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Others looked at that lake and thought of miracles, fishermen, and ancient stories. I looked at it and thought of oxygen saturation, salinity levels, and the silent march of ecological decline. I was born in Haifa, into a Jewish family proud of tradition, but quiet in faith. My parents observed holidays with candles and prayers, but I was always drawn more to microscopes and textbooks than scriptures. The mysteries of algae blooms seemed more pressing to me than the mysteries of heaven. Numbers were clean. Formulas didn't betray you. Faith, to me, was wishful thinking wrapped in poetry. My wife, Ruth, was the opposite. She prayed before meals, lit the Shabbat candles with reverence, and spoke of God with the calm certainty of someone who had felt his presence. I used to watch her lips move in prayer while my mind drifted to physics and combustion, marveling at how fire consumed oxygen. She prayed for our son, Daniel, while I wired him tuition money abroad, thinking that was the more practical form of love. In truth, I adored them both. Ruth with her steady devotion, Daniel with his restless curiosity, but I could never bring myself to believe in what I could not test. That morning began like so many others. A veil of mist floated above the Kinneret, the rising sun brushing the surface with pale gold. My small research boat, Orion, rocked gently as I leaned over the side, dipping a vial into the water. I was lost in thought, considering the troubling reports of chemical imbalances in the lake. The salinity was dropping, plankton populations shifting. To me, these were puzzles to be solved, not omens to be read. Then it struck. It wasn't a sharp stab, not the clean slice of a blade. It was pressure, immense, suffocating pressure, as if the weight of the entire sea had collapsed onto my chest. My hands went cold. The vial slipped from my grasp, disappearing into the depths like a secret. My scientist's brain, ever calculating, screamed, "Heart attack." My mind raced through symptoms, probabilities, survival chances. My body was shutting down faster than reason could save me. I clawed for the radio, my fingers trembling, failing me. One moment I was gasping, clutching at life. The next, silence. The pain evaporated. The crushing weight vanished. In its place was a stillness deeper than any laboratory quiet. Darkness surrounded me, not frightening, but strangely tender, like velvet pressed against my soul. I was aware, yet detached. My body was gone, but I was not. Below me, I saw the boat. I saw myself slumped against the railing, one arm stretched toward the useless radio. My skin looked waxen, my lips pale. For the first time, I pitied myself, not as a scientist or a husband, but as a fragile creature whose time had expired. Then grief hit me, not for my life, but for Ruth and Daniel. I imagined Ruth lighting candles alone, her prayers unanswered. I imagined Daniel receiving the news across an ocean, his world shattered. That grief felt heavier than the heart attack itself. In the distance, I noticed a fishing vessel turning toward me. Men shouted, pointing. One dialed a phone. But fear never came. Instead, peace enfolded me. The endless worries of reports, grants, and deadlines dissolved like ink in water. All that remained was quiet observation, as if I were watching a scene from someone else's life. Then the darkness shifted. It wasn't a tunnel or a flash. It was more like the dark itself grew pregnant with warmth, as if invisible hands had kindled a fire from within the void. A brilliance emerged, not searing like sunlight, but alive. A light felt not with eyes, but with the soul. And within it, someone. He was not the figure I'd seen in paintings or religious icons. He was more real than matter, more alive than the pulse I had just lost. His robe was simple, but light seemed to flow from within him, wrapping everything in radiance. I could not trace the lines of his face clearly, yet his eyes cut through me like truth itself. Those eyes didn't just look at me, they knew me. They knew Eli, the child terrified of shadows in his bedroom. They knew Eli, the young man, crushed when his first love walked away. They knew Eli, the husband, hiding doubts behind silence, the father who thought money could replace prayer. Every shame, every doubt, every selfish choice, he saw it all. Yet there was no judgment, only love. Love so fierce, so absolute, it undid me. If love could be measured, it was infinity squared. It was the warmth of every sunrise I had ever ignored, the tenderness of every embrace I had received but never understood, magnified beyond comprehension. Tears I no longer physically had, streamed through a soul that suddenly realized it had been thirsty its entire life. Then he spoke.
His voice wasn't carried on air. It was woven straight into my essence, like truth pouring into the deepest corners of who I was. It was thunder wrapped in whisper, command clothed in gentleness. Eli. My very being shook at the sound of my own name, and in that instant, I knew who he was. Yeshua. Jesus. Not merely a historical teacher as I had assumed, not a myth carried by Ruth's whispered prayers, but the source of life itself. I had spent decades analyzing water, dissecting its chemistry, but he said to me, "You've studied the waters of earth. Let me show you the water that truly matters." The light swelled and suddenly the Sea of Galilee stretched beneath us, but not as I had ever seen it. It shimmered like crystal, glowing from depths untouched by pollution or decay. Every fish, every reed, every stone pulsed with holiness. It was life as it was meant to be, unmarred, unspoiled. "This," he said, his eyes heavy with meaning, "is what the heart was created to hold. Purity, love, forgiveness, worship." I trembled, overwhelmed by the sight. But then his gaze shifted, and the vision began to change. After that fateful day, life for T and Anne was never the same again. The 14-year-old girl, once carefree and full of innocence, now carried a heaviness in her heart that no child should have to bear. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, seemed older, shadowed with secrets she could not explain. Every night she would wake in terror, clutching her blanket with trembling hands. Her dreams were no ordinary dreams. They were vivid, almost too real, as if she had stepped into another world. Each time she found herself in a vast chamber draped in darkness. Around her, countless faces appeared, some crying, some pleading, others smirking with cruelty. Their voices mingled into a cacophony of grief and mockery. And in the center of it all stood a tall figure cloaked in shadow. His face was hidden, concealed as if the world was not ready to see the truth behind it. Whenever Theanon tried to look closer, light would burst forth, blinding, overwhelming, as though heaven itself was preventing her from unveiling the mystery too soon. She would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding like a drumbeat inside her chest. Terrified yet compelled, she began to write down everything she remembered in a small notebook she kept hidden beneath her pillow. The words, scrawled hastily in shaky handwriting, carried a chilling message. A man of power will be unmasked. The light will break through. The people will see the truth. At first, her parents dismissed it as the aftermath of trauma. They thought their daughter's mind was still reeling from her near-death experience. Her mother would stroke her hair gently, whispering, "It's just a dream, sweetheart. You're safe now." But her father's eyes betrayed a different story. A flicker of worry lingered in his gaze. He had heard of others who returned from the brink of death with visions, warnings meant to shake the living awake, and now seeing his daughter, he wondered if God himself was speaking through her. Word of her visions began to spread through their small town. Neighbors whispered at the market, classmates exchanged curious glances at school, and even strangers knocked at their door, asking the young girl to recount her dreams. Some laughed, dismissing it as childish fantasy, but others listened intently, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. They believed that perhaps God himself had chosen this fragile girl as his messenger. The burden grew heavier each passing day. It wasn't just a face in the dark anymore. Her dreams became broader, more intense. She saw crowds of people gathered in public squares, their voices rising like thunder. She saw flags waving, banners lifting high, chants echoing into the night. And then, above them all, she saw a pair of invisible hands removing a mask from the shattered man's face. When the mask fell, the crowd recoiled in horror, their cries piercing the air like shattered glass. She woke screaming, her body trembling violently. Falling to her knees beside her bed, she prayed through sobs. "Lord, what do you want me to do with this? I'm just a child. No one will believe me. Please, give me strength." And as her tears soaked the pages of her journal, she felt it, a peace unlike anything she had ever known. A gentle voice seemed to whisper in the silence, "Be faithful. The time will come." The following weeks only deepened her sense of urgency. Even during school hours, when her friends joked and laughed, the images would flash before her eyes. She would grip her notebook tightly beneath the desk, her knuckles white. She was living in two worlds, one of present reality and one of looming revelation. One afternoon, unable to keep it bottled inside, she confided in her closest friend, Lan Fuang. The two girls sat under the old oak tree behind the schoolyard, the breeze rustling through the leaves. Tian'an's voice quivered as she described the faceless man, the blinding light, and the mask that fell. Lan Fuang didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes like others had. Instead, she squeezed Tian'an's hand firmly and whispered, "Maybe God is choosing you, Anne. Don't be afraid. If he shows you these things, he'll also give you the strength to carry them." Those words became a small flame in the darkness. For the first time, Tian'an felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. One evening, as her family gathered in the living room, her father turned on the television. The news broadcast showed a powerful leader speaking with confidence, smiling broadly as he promised to bring order and peace to a fractured world. His words were persuasive, his charm undeniable. The audience cheered and clapped as though he were their savior.
But to Tian'an, the sight was chilling. She froze, her body rigid, her breath caught in her throat. Though the man's face was visible and well-known, something deep inside her stirred with recognition. It was him, the same presence she had seen in her visions. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, yet heavy with fear. "Dad? That's him." Silence fell over the room. Her father's hand tightened around the remote control, his jaw set. Her mother wrapped her arms around her daughter protectively, as though shielding her from the weight of her own words. They all knew, in that single moment, that her journey was no longer something that could be dismissed as childish dreams. From that night on, the visions intensified. She not only saw images, but felt the emotions of the people. Confusion, betrayal, anger, despair. It was as though she was standing among them, carrying the collective pain of millions on her young shoulders. Each time she closed her journal, her chest tightened with dread. How could a 14-year-old girl carry such a burden? Who would ever believe her? And yet, a haunting question pressed against her heart. If I stay silent, will disaster come sooner? The call inside her grew louder, unrelenting, like waves crashing against stubborn rocks. She knew the day would soon come when she could no longer remain silent. A decision was looming, one that would change not only her life, but perhaps the course of countless others. And as she lay in bed that night, eyes wide open in the darkness, a single thought echoed through her soul. I was chosen, but will I have the courage to obey? The days that followed grew heavier with each passing hour. Tian'an tried to live as she once had, studying, laughing when her friends joked, and eating dinner with her parents. But something inside her had changed. Her innocence had been replaced with a burden too vast for her young shoulders. The visions would not let her go. They haunted her during the day, surged through her at night, and pressed on her heart with a weight she could no longer ignore. One evening, she dreamed of a grand arena filled with thousands of people. They shouted, clapped, and cheered with almost blind devotion.
In the middle stood the man she had seen so many times before, draped in authority and confidence. He smiled as though he carried the world in his hands. His voice thundered with promises of unity, of safety, of a future free from fear. The crowd adored him, drinking in every word as though he were their salvation. But beneath the noise, Theanon sensed something sinister, a deception cloaked in charm. His smile was too polished, his words too sweet. When she looked harder, she saw cracks forming in the image, like a mask threatening to shatter. And then, as always, the blinding light came, ripping away the illusions, tearing at the disguise, showing glimpses of fury beneath the false perfection. She awoke with a scream caught in her throat. Her notebook, already filled with frantic writings, soon received another trembling entry. He will rise with promises of peace, but his peace is built on lies. Behind the mask waits betrayal. The next morning, she tried to tell her mother, "Mom, I can't escape these dreams. I see him every night. He looks so kind, but he isn't. People believe him, but they don't see the danger." Her mother sighed, pulling her daughter into her arms. "My sweet girl, you've been through such a terrible ordeal. Sometimes our minds hold on to fear and shape it into dreams." But Theanon shook her head fiercely, tears burning in her eyes. "It's not just fear, it's real. Why would God show me these things if I wasn't meant to do something?" Her mother's lips trembled. She couldn't answer. Instead, she pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and whispered, "If God chose you, he will not leave you alone." At school, things grew unbearable. Whispers trailed behind her wherever she went. "That's her," some students muttered, pointing. "The prophet girl." Others shoved notes into her locker, mocking messages scrawled in cruel handwriting. "Tell us our future, fortune teller." Laughter often followed her down the hall. Her only anchor was Lan Puang. Loyal as ever, her best friend never wavered. "Ignore them," she said firmly, squeezing Theanon's hand. "They mock because they're afraid. Deep down, they know there's truth in you." Still, loneliness clung to Theanon like a shadow. She longed for the simplicity of childhood, but that life was gone. The storm of destiny had swallowed her, and there was no turning back. Then came the thunderstorm. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the walls of her home, and in that violent night, a vision stronger than any before overtook her. She saw the cloaked man seated at a massive table, surrounded by powerful figures. Maps lay before them, nations marked, lines drawn. Their whispers carried schemes of dominance and control. The air reeked of betrayal. The vision shifted and horror followed. Buildings crumbling, crowds fleeing in panic, fire consuming cities. And above it all, the man stood triumphant. Until the moment of unmasking, his true face revealed, twisted with rage, as the people cried out in despair. She awoke screaming, clutching her chest. Her father rushed into her room, holding her tightly as she sobbed. Between choking breaths, she whispered, "He will destroy so much, Dad. They'll follow him, but he's a liar. I saw it. I saw everything." Her father's jaw tightened. He had fought the urge to believe, but the weight of his daughter's terror crushed his doubt. Looking at her trembling form, he knew this was no ordinary dream. The following Sunday, their family sat in church as the pastor spoke about discernment and how God often chooses the least expected to carry his truth. The words pierced her heart. During the final hymn, as the congregation sang, she felt a burning in her chest, a fire urging her to act. In the quiet of her soul, she heard it again. Speak. Do not be silent.
But fear gripped her. How could she, a girl of 14, stand against the tide of disbelief? Who would listen? The answer came unexpectedly. Her school announced a debate contest. The topic, Truth and Leadership in Uncertain Times. Long Fuang urged her to join. This is your chance, Anne. Maybe you don't have to say everything, but you can speak what's in your heart. Her knees went weak at the thought. Standing before her peers meant exposing herself to ridicule all over again. Yet the inner voice pressed harder. Be faithful. So she signed up. On the day of the debate, she stood trembling behind the podium. The auditorium buzzed with whispers. She felt their eyes on her, mocking, skeptical, expectant. For a moment, she wanted to run, but then she remembered the light that had broken through the darkness of her visions. She steadied her breath and spoke. Truth, she began softly, isn't always what we want to hear. It doesn't always come from people we expect. Sometimes truth hides beneath what looks appealing, beneath words that sound perfect. But if we stop asking questions, if we trust blindly, we may follow a mask instead of a man. And when the mask falls, it may be too late. The room grew silent. Even those who had mocked her before seemed frozen, caught by the sharpness of her words. She stepped down, legs shaking. A few students clapped, hesitant but genuine. Others stared, their expressions unsettled. She didn't need applause. She knew she had planted a seed. But the next day, she found a note in her locker. The handwriting was jagged, angry. Stop talking or you'll regret it. Her hands shook as she read it. This was no longer about jokes or whispers. Someone felt threatened. Someone wanted her silenced. That night, as she lay in bed, fear crept into her bones. For the first time, she realized that her visions were not just burdens, they were dangerous. And yet, deep in her heart, she also knew something else. If God had chosen her, then her silence would be the greater danger. She whispered into the darkness, voice trembling but resolute, Lord, I'm terrified, but if you called me, I will not turn away. And somewhere in that midnight silence, a shiver of destiny stirred, for she understood now, her greatest battles had not yet begun. But imagine this, a 14-year-old girl, trembling under the weight of visions too great for her age, already marked by whispers, already threatened into silence. What if her voice is the only one willing to expose the mask before it's too late? What if the choice she makes next decides not only her future, but the future of countless others? The storm is coming, and she cannot run forever. Stay with her. Subscribe now because what unfolds next will shake you to your core.